Hello and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're not tired of 2021 content yet, because this is going to be the start of a series where I review all of the 2021 new releases that I read in 2021. I really like to read. I read too many books. Like, it's an excessive number of books. And so I like to set little challenges for myself that kind of help determine what I'm going to read. I'm not overly picky about what I pick up because I read books so quickly, and also I am more than happy to DNF something that I'm just not vibing with. This year is all about reading major series that are really well loved within the community, as well as a very stupid and silly challenge where I'm trying to read the rainbow, but I'll talk about that more later in another video. For 2021 though, my goal was to read as many new releases as I could for the year, so I'd be really informed when it came time to vote on things for like awards and everything at the end of the year. As such, I managed to read over 100 titles, which is way too many, just way too many. So I'm going to break this up by genre. Today we're going to be going over all the horror I managed to read that came out in 2021.
Beware.
I should mention that as a primarily sci-fi and fantasy reader, the type of horror that I like tends to lean supernatural. So if there's zero supernatural involvement, it's not to say that I won't enjoy that book, but it probably won't get as high a rating from me as something that does employ some kind of fantastical elements. So maybe if you're more of a contemporary reader and you don't like those supernatural or speculative elements in your fiction, you might have a completely reversed list to me, and that's totally chill. I'm just putting it out there. So we're going to start with the books that I least liked and work our way all the way up to the top.
Begin.
Beginning with my only DNF in this category, and that is My Heart is a Chainsaw. I'm just not sure that Stephen Graham Jones' writing is for me. I read one of his other books and I gave it a fairly low rating as well. This one is the book that I managed to get the furthest into without completing it last year, and that was 80%. I only had the audiobook copy, I didn't have a physical to follow along with, and that might have contributed to why I wasn't really jiving with it, but I just found I couldn't pay attention, I couldn't stay focused on the characters, on the plot points. I kept drifting off and getting bored and then going back and listening to the same part over and over and over again and realizing actually maybe I was listening to it, I just wasn't absorbing it because it all sounded really familiar and I could almost say it word for word. I wasn't interested and engaged, and so ultimately at 80%, I decided there's no point to finish this other than to finish it, and what am I even doing with my life at that point? I believe I'm in the minority. I hear a lot of people are really enjoying this book and it's going to get a sequel, so if you're interested in it, pick it up. But this is something that I just don't think was for me.
Shame. Shame. Shame.
Shame.
Shame.
Shame. Shame.
And that's going to be probably a theme for a lot of the books on this list. Next up is White Smoke, and I absolutely did not like this book at all.
I want you to leave and never come back.
Which is wild because in January I just read another book by the author. I think it might have been her debut or her second book, Monday's Not Coming, and I really enjoyed that. I thought that was excellent.
How curious, how peculiar.
But for White Smoke, it just didn't work for me. For one thing, it felt really similar to a lot of tropes and different elements that we've been getting in media recently, even really big, high-profile media. So it was a very familiar type of storyline that we were getting. The main character is obsessed with bedbugs. She's so freaked out by them and she brings them up all the time. So if you have a bedbug phobia, maybe don't pick up this title at all. They also have some really weird viewpoints towards marijuana, especially as it's becoming more and more legal in more states in the US. It was just a really weird and backward, almost like they were treating it like a gateway drug type of thing, and that's been very widely disproven. So I didn't really understand those elements. Also, there were some moments where like she's talking to her best friend on the phone or on a video call, and then, oh, there's something spooky going on in my house. Better go investigate, and hang up. Why would you hang up? Just stay on the phone. The biggest deal is always having to call for help. You're already on the call. All you gotta say is help.
It makes no damn sense.
And so that was totally unbelievable and really whipped me out of the story. But mostly it was the end. I did not like how this came together. I didn't like how rushed it felt at the end and how everything was explained, and this really just doesn't make sense what these people's motivations would be to be carrying on the plot like this. I didn't enjoy this one at all.
Stop writing!
And then there's The Taking of Jake Livingston. And this is the book that helped me to realize I don't enjoy reading about school shooters, even one little bit.
Not a mistake I'd be likely to make again.
It really put me into a funk. I was very grumpy. It's a very, very short book, but it took me ages to get through it because I was just pushing myself to complete 10 pages, 16 pages. It was so difficult to get through. And it really wasn't sticking with the magic system and all that sort of thing. I thought that the friend relationships felt very, very rushed and out of nowhere, especially with the backstory that we're given on the character and how easily they're able to make friends in their life. And just ultimately, I really, really disliked reading from the shooter's point of view.
Makes me sick.
Overall, I haven't heard really great things from this one since. There's been a couple people who really love it, and especially the magic system and how the fights were choreographed and that sort of thing. They found it very cinematic, but I just don't think this title is particularly worth it.
Now be gone! Go!
Next up is Sorrowland, and this one's a bit of a tricky one for me. I've read multiple books by River Solomon now, and I think that for me, I really like the concepts that are being laid out. I like what they're doing with blackness and queerness. They have a lot of elements of sexuality and gender and how it's biologically represented in the body that I think are really unique and not being represented elsewhere in the genre right now. But overall, I don't particularly enjoy, like, entertainment value-wise while I'm reading the books.
Horrible tragedy.
I think that the concepts that are laid out are really interesting and they give me something to think on and chew on later after I'm done. And so I'll probably keep picking up their books for that reason, but the actual reading experience isn't very pleasurable for me. I'm not sure what it is, it really just seems to be this author, but I do think that their books are interesting, and if they appeal to you, you should definitely pick them up. The next book is When the Reckoning Comes, and I love this cover. I think it is so well done, it's so gorgeous, it's got that real southern gothic feel. I love the way that the words in the title look like blood that's dripping, but I cannot explain what I dislike about this one except for spoilers, so please skip ahead to this timestamp if you don't want to be spoiled for this book. In 3, 2, 1. So my main issue is that, one, we don't even know if the haunting is real the whole time. The main character does get haunted by a lot of ghosts and sees all of these really traumatic and horrifying real things that slaves went through, but nobody else ever does. And so it's unclear if it's just a figment of her imagination, if she has some kind of brain breakdown sort of thing and she's able to vividly imagine these things as if she was there. But either way, she's the only one who's affected, and as one of the token African Americans in this whole book, she's not the target audience who needs to be haunted. The people who needed to be haunted are the white folks who decide to have their wedding.
That is hooey.
So for those reasons, it just didn't jive well with me and I got really mad about it. I thought that before I knew what the ending was, I was really along for the ride and I was enjoying it and thought it was very well done and had a lot of meaningful things to say. But because of how it concluded, it made me so mad.
Flames on the side of my face.
Coming in fourth is The Death of Jane Lawrence, and I was really excited for this one, especially the beginning. It very much hooked me. It's got kind of like a feminist vibe. She's very much going out to find a man. She's made a list of all the eligible bachelors in town and gone, you know what? You're my top of the list. You're the one who best meets my criteria. I've got something to offer you. You've got something to offer me. I don't care if we ever have a romantic relationship. We'll talk about kids later on, but I think that this would benefit us both. And so she's just very much getting it done. She's got a to-do list, very analytically approaching everything. And I thought that was really great. What I didn't like is when there was all of a sudden a romance in this, because that's not what's set up in the beginning. That's not what I signed up for.
Nobody asked for that.
I signed up for analytical Jane, who's very by the book, logic, facts, and math, and not really just having this insta-love out of nowhere. So partway through the book, I really felt like the plot that we were following fully did a shift, and that the characters themselves also fully did a shift, so nobody was acting how they had been in the beginning, and they never really returned to it either. It's just a sudden shift, and that's it. That's their new character now. Like, it was a fully different book.
I'm sorry, I just hallucinated. What?
And so I think there's a lot of elements in this that I really like, and I can think back on them fondly, but overall I think that it wasn't very cohesive, and I'm not sure this might have been a debut. Maybe the author will improve in future, but for me there were just a lot of connections that were missing, so it stays more around the like 3, maybe 3.5 range. It was okay, and there's some cool ideas in it, but the work as a whole just isn't quite it. Coming in third is Tidepool, and this is kind of a Lovecraftian horror, which this is probably the first Lovecraftian type of entry that I've really enjoyed. I I very much liked the creatures and the cult type of people. They're not quite cultists or anything like that, but I don't really know how to term them. The people who kind of are into these beasts and or commune with them. So I really enjoyed all of the horror elements. I liked the lingering hauntingness. I liked how a lot of things were phrased and all the flashbacks that they did. I thought those were really well done. The one thing that very much bothered me though, which isn't really a spoiler, is that we're following the main character Sorrow while she's in the town of Tidepool, and she constantly is smart enough to know, I want to leave. I want to get out of Tidepool.
Why wait?
But the author needs to keep her there because that's where all the action and everything is happening. And so I felt like the reasons that she stays get more and more tenuous as the book goes on, because she repeatedly is like, I want to go, and then something happens that is like, okay, gotta stay. And then she's like, no, I want to go, and then there's another something that makes her need to stay. And I just felt those were really silly and kind of stretching my suspension of disbelief and pulling me out of the book quite a bit. But other than that element, I didn't really have complaints. I thought it was well done, so I look forward to seeing how the author goes from here. The second book on this list is A Dowry of Blood, and I thought this was so beautifully done. I was a little bit salty because it's a UK printing and it hadn't been printed in the US yet, so my library refused to order a copy.
I beg your pardon.
But ultimately, I was so glad I did buy it. It was beautifully written. The author normally does poetry, and I believe that this is their debut novella. It's pretty short, but I don't know if it quite crosses the line. But even on the first read through, I normally don't tab up my books except for on a second read through, and this one I was already tabbing things the first time around. There were just some phrases that were so beautifully written and I really wanted to go back to them, and so I loved this. It's a great look at trauma and relationships and how we build a family and manipulative relationships and gaslighting and all that sort of thing. And building yourself up, how your identity is inside and out of a relationship and recovering from abuse. It was just really beautifully done, and I think that everyone should pick this one up. I also like the way that it's definitely about Dracula and Dracula's wives, but you never actually say the name Dracula because it's all written from one of his wives, and so it's always addressing you being Dracula is something that you can kind of read between the lines and understand, and I thought it was really clever to never actually call out his name. The last book on this list is something that I have been absolutely raving about since I read it. Picture this. It's the 1930s. You're in the Smoky Mountains. There's a backwoodsy type of family. They've got a church built on their property. And through the church, you can get down into the caverns where they have their own personal god hole. Inside of this cavern is the family's god, and they call him Ghost Daddy. As soon as I heard the word Ghost Daddy mentioned, I was like, sign me up, absolutely. Does my library have it? Yes? Okay, it's reserved now. I'm going to read this book. And happily, it delivered. It surprised me so much. I didn't know what to expect going into this book, but it was wonderful.
Yes, 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 yes!
I also discovered that I really love the term godhole. No, they don't use it in any of the marketing, but I think they should. It's something that as I was describing this book, I started just calling it the godhole, and I was like, oh, I like that phrase. That makes me think of so many things, and I'm so interested and intrigued. Weirdly enough, this isn't the only book I read this year that had a godhole, but I loved it. I loved it so much. This is not gory or full of thrills. This is the haunting kind of horror. This is your skin feels a little prickly, the hairs on the back of your neck are standing up because something is wrong and you don't know how it's wrong or why it's wrong, but you know something bad is coming, and because you don't know what it is, you can't stop it.
Oh, you want dark and ominous.
And I just thought it was so beautifully done. I listened to some dark cello music in the background while I was reading through this, and it was so atmospheric. This book does a lot of looking at religion and patriarchy, the exploitation and subjugation of women. And it just had some really interesting questions and themes, and the way that everything was carried out. I want more people to read this book, and especially to let the publisher know that you're reading this book, because I really want them to print it out in paperback. Right now it's only available in the hardcover deckled edges, and I'm convinced that whoever invented deckled edges didn't have any pets, because the amount of cat hair that so quickly piles up on those pages is insane. I hate deckled edges. They are the worst.
I just don't think it's right.
So I would love to own this in paperback, but I feel like it flew so under the radar that I'm actually really nervous that it's not going to get that second print run and come out in a different format. So if you get nothing else from this video, please go read Revelator. It's amazing. It's so interesting. At the very least, I don't think it's like anything else that you're going to have read over the last year.
That was brilliant.
So those are all the books that I read in the horror category for 2021 new releases. Next up, I'll be going over my mystery and thriller reads, so make sure that you tune back in for that. Were any of the books on this list ones that you also read? Do you disagree with me? Do you agree with me? Are there books that I should have picked up in horror? Let me know. Comment down below. Also feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!
Oh, hi.